Daryl Kozubo from SolGold. Daryl's CEO and Managing Director of SolGold. He has extensive executive leadership experience in the global resources sector. He was most recently Chief Manufacturing and Supply Officer at Orica, where he moved from 2015 after a 24-year career at BHP. Daryl's got broad international perspective, having run operations in over 30 countries, and has the ability to understand and work across diverse cultures to deliver results. Over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane. It's great to be here with you today. Let me first start by thanking Diggers and Dealers and Canaccord for the opportunity to talk to you today. And let me also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're at and pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging. SolGold is an emerging multi-asset copper gold company with our primary focus in Ecuador. We stand right at the juncture of this incredible global need and incredible opportunity. The incredible global need, we've heard about that the last few days, where we know we can't get to a net zero emissions future without much more copper. But the stark reality is, as this need is becoming more acute, we're finding less and less copper discoveries. The incredible opportunity is that Ecuador can, and in fact needs to be, the next copper frontier. And I say that with confidence for two reasons. So firstly, Ecuador sits on the most unexplored part of the Andean copper belt, and this Andean copper belt represents 40% of the world's copper production today, mainly through Chile and production. And secondly, Ecuador is being very proactive around opening up for investment, particularly for responsible mining, which they see as their primary economic growth engine going forward. Now, SolGold is right at the juncture because, one, it's got the largest Kozubo project that's currently in definitive feasibility study phase, and secondly, we have 76 concessions, more exploration concessions than any other company in Ecuador, covering 3,200 square kilometres. Let me talk just a little bit about SolGold. So our market cap is around £570 million, which is a bit over $700 million. We're listed on the London and the Toronto Stock Exchange. We have two primary projects. One is Kozubo, and that's made up of two deposits, the Alpala deposit and the Tandayama America deposit. The Alpala deposit is massive. It's largely underground. It does have an open pit component to it, representing 2.7 or just under 2.7 billion tonnes at 0.53% copper equivalent. And the Tandayama is an open pit and underground resource of just over 500 million tonnes at 0.36% copper equivalent. And the way you should look at Tandayama is a potential starter pit to support the underground development of Alpala. The second project is Porvenir, which we're still drilling out. It's 400 million tonnes at 0.44% copper equivalent, and that is an open pit resource. Those two projects represent 12.6 million tonnes of copper and just under 27 million ounces of gold. We also have BHP and Newcrest, as our two major shareholders, followed by BlackRock and Franco-Nevada, who have invested $100 million into us as well. Now, I don't need to talk to this audience about the structural copper deficit that we're going to start seeing in the second half of this year. But what I did want to do is really just to help dimension what that looks like. So firstly, you see on the top right-hand graph there that it's a pretty serious decline in new copper deposits. The graph on the bottom left-hand curve shows that every year we're expecting to see significant copper production growth, but we actually don't realise that. The other thing I would point out with this graph is you can see how the trends typically rise and then come off. There's a number of greenfield projects that either have come or are coming and ramping up, but after that, there's a dearth of new projects. And as existing operations experience lowering grade, you can see that drop off in copper. So what does that all mean? So essentially the graph here on the bottom right-hand side, this is a Wood Mackenzie graph. Basically, it's showing that we start to see a significant structural copper deficit opening up in the second half of this decade. And by 2035, that deficit is in the order of 11 million tonnes. And to put that into perspective, to close that gap requires essentially one new Escondida mine, the world's largest copper mine, to be found, developed, brought online and ramped up every year from now until 2035. Some of you'd be aware that S&P Global released a report in the last couple of weeks, and they're predicting that the demand will double to 50 million tonnes by 2035, which makes this scenario look somewhat optimistic. Just to, if you like, help to mention Cascabel. So we released the pre-feasibility study for Cascabel in April, a few months ago, which confirmed its Tier 1 status. You can see in the graph there that Cascabel is the second biggest copper discovery in the last 10 years, and in fact represents 20% of the copper found and 16% of the gold found in the last decade. It's very attractive economics, so for $2.7 billion startup capex, it delivers a pre-tax NPV of 5.2 and a post-tax of 2.9 billion at a copper price of $3.60 a pound. Wood Mackenzie have this accelerated energy transition scenario, and if we were to achieve 2 degrees, so not 1.5 degrees, but 2 degrees by 2050, the inducement price for copper needs to be at least $4.20 a pound. If you run that scenario through, the NPV goes up pre-tax by nearly $1 billion to $3.8 billion for a 2.7 billion startup capex. Cascabel's Tier 1, it's large, it's long life, it's scalable and very low cost. It's 25 million tonnes per annum, producing 330,000 tonnes of copper equivalent on average for the first 5 years post ramp up. Very low cost. Its all-in sustaining cost is minus $1.38 a pound. Just the first block cave has a 26-year mine life. So you can see how this will run for 50 plus years. The economics are just based on that first block cave, and it represents only 21% of the measured and indicated resource. There's a very low carbon footprint. In fact, our aim is for Cascabel to be the first carbon neutral copper concentrate mine ever built. We've engaged Partners in Performance to help us have a clear roadmap to that, and it's very encouraging. And you'd expect it to be, given we've got access to hydropower, we're pumping concentrate downhill, block caving is very energy efficient, and by having full electrical fleet underground, you save on roadway and ventilation costs. And there's further upside of between $1 to $1.8 billion. Just a little bit more, this shows the production profile of Cascabel. So you can see in years 8, 9 and 10, that would be the natural time to bring on the second block cave. I talk about copper all the time, but the average gold production for the first 5 years post ramp up is 680,000 ounces of gold per annum. You can see it's very low on the top right hand side, it's very low cost position. That's driven by the low cost of block caving and the gold byproduct credits, and the operating parameters that we've assumed are being delivered by other block cave mines today. Cash flow, average cash flow post ramp up is $1.4 billion per annum, which is about double our market cap today, and has a very low capital intensity. And the reason it has a very low capital intensity is because we can tap into existing infrastructure. There's a road that goes right to the mine site. It's only 3 hours from Quito. We've got access 30 kilometres away to a hydropower grid. There's an existing port, and it's self-contained from a water perspective. So the water from a top-up requirement, it can be from the existing rainfall in the mine's catchment area. So we don't have to tap into aquifers or rivers or anything like that. The infrastructure also significantly lowers our project execution risk. What I'm going to do now is just play a short video that visualises some of what I've been talking about. I hope you enjoyed the somewhat dramatic sound effects there. Whilst I've spoken a lot about Cascabel really is only the start. Right at the start, I talked about the Andean copper belt, and you can see the map on the right-hand side shows how you're through Chile and Peru. It's just peppered with copper and gold mines, but it stops at the Ecuadorian border. We saw this 10 years ago, and with first mover advantage, it's why we've got 76 concessions, exploration concessions, more than anyone else. And we know it doesn't take much imagination to see, 10, 20 plus years that you'll see those copper and gold mines peppered right through Ecuador. And we're seeing it already, not just with Cascabel, but with Porvenir. And I've included a couple of photos that we took a few months ago of an outcrop in a Haliperdos concession. And this concession butts up against Solaris Resources concession, where they found the significant Warintza project copper deposit. This outcrop shows it's part of a porphyry system, and there's visible copper mineralisation. So we're looking forward to drilling that as soon as we get the drilling permits approved. I said Ecuador should and can be the next copper frontier. One, because it's got the geology, and secondly, it's got a very supportive government. And we've seen this firsthand. By way of example, we got an investment protection agreement last November, and in there's a clause that says if there's ever a need for arbitration, it will be held in the UK court system. And that's important to give all of us confidence that this multi-decade investment will pass through multiple political cycles, where the ultimate decisions in an independent, mature and understood court system. But you can see also, it's not just us that's seeing this. You see the vast increase in exploration spend, despite the impact of COVID. And in the last few years, you see a lot of the majors, whether it's BHP, Newcrest, Rio, Fortescue, etc., moving into the country. And I've never seen that happen so quickly into a country before. And these guys do their homework. I just want to conclude on a bit about community. So we've got strong government support, but we've also got strong local community support. And this has been built up over 10 years. We've done over 100 projects with our local community. Some examples are shown here. They've picked the projects, they've driven the projects, and the aim is to make them sustainable where they continue on without ongoing support. The community isn't just passive supporters, they're active supporters. The government knows that. Part of it is also because they see that Kozubo will bring 6,000 to 8,000 direct and indirect jobs in an area of relatively high unemployment. Let me just conclude with a comment that I started at the very beginning. Ecuador can, and in fact needs to be, the next copper frontier when the world needs copper the most. And I would argue no organisation is better than SolGold to enable that, given we've got the most significant project, Kozubo, in definitive feasibility phase, and secondly because we've got the most exploration concessions through Ecuador. Thank you. Thanks, Jane.
Thanks so much, Daryl. I did enjoy the dramatic sound effects, so great. And we won't have time for questions today. So moving